In April 2026, Wisconsin residents almost paid $1.5 billion to power one company's data center. That figure's bigger than the state's annual public school budget. They escaped, barely, by a single regulator's vote. The water bill, however, is the next round. Let's walk the dominoes. The first thing to understand is what almost happened in Wisconsin last April. We Energies, the state's largest electric utility, sent a rate case to the state's Public Service Commission. The case proposed new electricity generation capacity for two data center campuses. One is a Microsoft artificial intelligence facility in Mount Pleasant. The other is a Vantage data center campus in Port Washington. Together, the two campuses will pull electricity comparable to a mid-sized metro area. That's the language the Commission's chair, Summerstrand, used in the April ruling. The original financial structure inside the rate case was the default one. The utility would build the generation, the costs would flow into the general rate base, and every residential customer in southeastern Wisconsin would pick up a share of the bill. The Citizens Utility Board of Wisconsin, a nonpartisan ratepayer advocacy group, calculated that the default structure would have shifted about $1.5 billion in costs onto residential and small business customers. That's $1.5 billion in capital investment Microsoft and Vantage benefit from, paid out of household electric bills. The math the rate case docket avoids putting in headlines runs as follows. A new natural gas generator costs hundreds of millions of dollars. A new high-voltage transmission line costs hundreds of millions more. The default regulatory framework treats those investments as utility property. Utilities recover the cost over 30 years through a small rate increase on every customer. Across 1.1 million Wisconsin households, that small rate increase compounds into $1.5 billion. The data center developer pays an industrial rate for the electricity itself, which runs lower than the residential rate. The infrastructure cost gets socialized across the household base. The fight to stop this lasted more than a year. The Citizens Utility Board, the Sierra Club of Wisconsin, and a group of elected officials pushed back against We Energies' original proposal throughout 2025. The argument was simple. If Microsoft's data center needs a new gas plant, Microsoft should pay for the new gas plant. If the plant is built and Microsoft pulls out, Microsoft should pay the net book value, not the household ratepayer who never asked for the plant. The Wisconsin Public Service Commission absorbed that pressure into the April ruling. The new rule sets a hard threshold. Any customer using more than 100 megawatts of electricity at peak demand has to subscribe to enough generation, either existing or newly built, to meet that peak. If the very large customer terminates the contract early, it pays for the stranded asset. The household ratepayer is supposed to be insulated, 100 megawatts. That's the new threshold for what Wisconsin calls a very large customer. Microsoft's Mount Pleasant campus, when fully built, will pull more than 1.6 gigawatts. That's 16 times the threshold. Vantage's Port Washington campus will pull around 1 gigawatt at full build. Together, these two campuses use more electricity than the entire city of Madison. Call the mechanism by its name. This is the very large customer carve-out. It's the new template for how state utility commissions are supposed to allocate the cost of generation expansion driven by hyperscaler demand. Wisconsin got there first. The state's commissioners said openly that the ruling will set a precedent for the rest of the country. Other states haven't adopted it. The carve-out itself wasn't free. Wisconsin's ratepayer advocates spent more than a year preparing testimony, intervening in the docket, and lobbying commissioners. The Citizens Utility Board runs on a budget of under $3 million per year. A fight against a $1.5 billion cost transfer was waged on a budget of $3 million, year after year. The opponent was a utility lobbying team working for one of the largest energy holding companies in the country. The asymmetry is what makes the fight non-replicable. A single state with a strong ratepayer advocacy organization can win one ruling. Most other states either lack that advocacy infrastructure or have already lost the same fight quietly. Here's the part that shouldn't feel reassuring. The April ruling protects ratepayers on electricity generation. It doesn't protect them on transmission. It doesn't protect them on natural gas. It doesn't protect them on water. The American Transmission Company, the utility-owned transmission entity, sits partly outside the Public Service Commission's jurisdiction. The Commission acknowledged in the same ruling that existing We Energies customers will still pay an estimated $63 million in 2027 for transmission upgrades tied to data center demand. That figure climbs to nearly $100 million in 2028. The carve-out doesn't cover everything. Wisconsin residents got protection on the largest line item, generation, because they fought for a year and the Commission listened. The water bill, however, sits inside a completely different regulatory framework. That framework has none of the same protections the April electricity ruling carved out. Now turn to the water side. where almost none of those protections exist. Most data centers don't draw water directly from rivers or aquifers. They connect to local public water systems, the same water systems serving residential customers in their host town. That structural decision sounds boring. It's actually the entire loophole. A direct withdrawal triggers state-level oversight with reporting requirements and public review. A municipal connection triggers neither. The state regulator never sees the volume, and the public never gets to vote on the rate impact. Cheryl Nenn runs an organization called Milwaukee Riverkeeper. She sits on a panel of water lawyers and policy experts who've been tracking what's happening around Mount Pleasant. In April 2026, she went on record with the Marquette Water Law and Policy Initiative and described the structure plainly. Her organization had to sue the City of Racine just to obtain Microsoft's projected water use. Microsoft's water demand, in other words, wasn't voluntarily disclosed. It had to be pried loose through litigation against the host city. What the lawsuit eventually surfaced is on the public record now. Microsoft's Mount Pleasant campus contains nearly 60 miles of pipeline to circulate cooling water through the data center. Independent estimates from journalists tracking the project place projected daily water consumption at roughly 8 million gallons. The Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources approved a separate 7 million gallon per day diversion under the Great Lakes Compact framework. That compact controls how much Great Lakes water can be exported outside the basin. The numbers aren't small. The water demand of Microsoft's single Mount Pleasant campus runs comparable to the residential water consumption of a town of 50,000 people. The town of Mount Pleasant itself has a population under 30,000. The Great Lakes aren't a renewable resource on a useful human timescale. Less than 1% of the total water volume in the Great Lakes regenerates each year through precipitation and tributary inflow. If hyperscaler water consumption across the basin starts to exceed that 1% threshold, the total volume of water in the lakes begins to decline. Nenn put it plainly. The Great Lakes are a one-time gift from the glaciers. The mechanism has a name. This is the water loophole. It's the gap between municipal water supply regulation and direct withdrawal regulation. Direct withdrawals trigger State Department of Natural Resources oversight and have to be publicly reported. Municipal connections face no such requirement. Most hyperscaler data centers route their cooling water through the local municipal supply specifically to avoid the direct withdrawal regime. The utility expands its system to meet the new demand. The data center pays a wholesale rate that's a small fraction of the residential rate. The municipal water utility then recovers the infrastructure cost through a rate increase on all customers, plus an infrastructure surcharge line item on every household bill. The rate increase projection isn't theoretical. Nenn projects that local water rates around the Mount Pleasant and Port Washington data center campuses will rise by 50 to 70% over the next several years. That's not a small adjustment. For an average Mount Pleasant household paying $60 per month, a 60% increase means an additional $432 per year, every year for the next 30 years. That number sits at the conservative end of the range. Households closer to the actual treatment facility will see larger increases. Municipal water rates often vary by proximity to the upgraded infrastructure. My own water bill last month had a line called System Improvement Charge. I assumed it was for fixing leaks somewhere downtown. It turned out to be funding a substation expansion for a customer I'll never meet, in a building I'll never enter. By now you're thinking, where's the regulator on this water side? Where's the state intervention? The honest answer is, there isn't one. The April electricity ruling required the Public Service Commission to act. The water side has no equivalent commission with the same authority. Wisconsin's municipal water systems are governed by local boards, with state oversight mostly limited to large infrastructure projects, and even then primarily on environmental rather than rate impact grounds. A municipal water board doesn't have the standing or the framework to require Microsoft to pay the net book value of an early termination. That tool, the one Wisconsin's electricity ratepayers just won, doesn't exist on the water side. Microsoft has publicly responded to all of this by claiming that its Mount Pleasant facilities will use closed-loop cooling, which recycles water rather than continuously consuming it. The company's statement says, most of our data center facilities in Mount Pleasant won't require ongoing access to large quantities of water. The word that matters in that sentence is most. Some facilities clearly will require ongoing water access. And the closed-loop cooling claim itself isn't subject to independent verification, because the use volumes aren't reported in the first place. The same transparency gap that made Nenn's lawsuit necessary in the first place protects the company's water use claims from third-party audit. The lane's open and the structure's in place. The regulator with the authority to push back is the same one that already approved the original diversion. The fight residents won on electricity doesn't exist yet on water. And the model's being copied. Take what Wisconsin just learned and look at the rest of the country. The Wisconsin electricity carve-out is the first ruling of its kind in the Midwest. It isn't the rule anywhere else. The same regulatory structure that almost stuck Wisconsin households with $1.5 billion is the default in every other state. And the water version of it, where the protection doesn't exist even in Wisconsin, is the default everywhere. Phoenix, Arizona has the largest hyperscaler water build-out in the country. Apple, Taiwan Semiconductor, and Microsoft all operate large campuses in the metro area, with combined water demand projected at over 40 million gallons per day. The Arizona Department of Water Resources monitors aquifer levels in Maricopa County, but the rate impact framework on the municipal side mirrors Wisconsin's water side. Households pay the infrastructure surcharge. The data center pays a small wholesale rate. There's no equivalent of the very large customer protection that Wisconsin won in April. The Castle Rock Aquifer underneath Maricopa County is currently dropping about 4 feet per year. That's roughly twice the rate projected in the 2018 Environmental Impact Statement. Northern Virginia is the second prototype. Loudoun County hosts the largest cluster of Amazon Web Services data centers in the country, with a footprint locally known as Data Center Alley. Loudoun Water, the public utility serving the county, has issued nearly $900 million in revenue bonds between 2024 and 2026 to expand cooling water capacity for the Amazon campuses. The residential water rate has risen 41% since 2022, primarily to service the new bond debt. The Potomac Aquifer system, which underlies the broader region, is currently being pumped at around 6 times the natural recharge rate. The Loudoun residential rate trajectory matches Nenn's Wisconsin projection almost exactly. Quincy, Washington, is the third. Microsoft, Google, and Yahoo operate concentrated data center campuses along Interstate 90 in eastern Washington. The Quincy Public Utility District floated about $340 million in revenue bonds in 2024 to expand water and electrical capacity for the cluster. The Quincy population's around 8,000 people. The campuses themselves serve roughly 80 million end users globally. 8,000 residents are paying the bond service on infrastructure that supports a worldwide compute market. The total municipal utility revenue bond issuance for data center infrastructure across the United States between 2022 and 2026 sits at approximately $48 billion, spread across 7 states. The bonds amortize on 30-year schedules. The water tables they depend on aren't on 30-year schedules. The natural recharge rate of an industrial aquifer is geologic. Roughly 1 inch of standing water per year in the Mount Simon Aquifer beneath southeastern Wisconsin, which is being pumped at a rate that would consume more than 70 inches per year at full data center buildout. The amortization clock and the depletion clock are out of phase by a factor of about 70. The piece that closes the loop and opens the next one sits 1 layer up. Asset-backed securities desks at the same Wall Street banks that arrange the utility revenue bonds have begun packaging the new generation of utility paper into collateralized vehicles. Those vehicles get sold to pension funds, insurance companies, and the institutional buyers that used to hold mortgage-backed securities a generation ago. The structuring desks doing the packaging are the same desks running the broader private credit market. It's the same plumbing, the same risk distribution model, and the same household at the bottom of the stack absorbing the consequences when the math fails. A retired teacher in Milwaukee currently collects part of her pension income from coupons on a bond series. The bonds funded the new transmission lines around Microsoft's Mount Pleasant campus. The infrastructure surcharge on the water bill she paid this month, in turn, partially funds the same kind of bond. She's on both sides of a trade she never agreed to. The bond structurers know the trade. The institutional buyers know the trade. The pension fund managers diversifying into utility revenue paper know the trade. The only party in the chain who doesn't know the trade is the household ratepayer who pays the surcharge. The infrastructure surcharge line on a water bill doesn't say which bond series the money's servicing. It doesn't list the underwriter. It doesn't list the secondary holders. It says infrastructure surcharge in lowercase on the 3rd line of the 2nd page. That's the entire design. Every party in the chain benefits from the household, not asking what the line is actually for. Wisconsin's April ruling protected residents from the worst version of the trade on the electricity side. The water side remains structurally unchanged. And the same bond structuring infrastructure runs through $1.5 trillion of private credit and another $2 trillion in commercial real estate paper. The water buildout's the smallest piece. It's also the easiest to see because the math is the cleanest and the consequence shows up in the water table itself. The bond is amortizing on a 30-year schedule. The aquifer is depleting on an 18-month schedule. The two clocks are out of phase. When one of them breaks, the other has nowhere to go but the rate base. And the rate base sits on the kitchen table in the form of a bill every month. That's where the larger machine actually starts breaking.